Welcome to Tuesday's edition of COVID-19. Korea has recorded some 500 new infections today. Authorities, for their part, have been quick to point out the tally is not a sign of a shift in trend, as all essential indicators show a rebound in the near future. Meanwhile, public concerns over possible blood clots post-inoculation continue, and we are poised to look into those concerns later on in the program. Here first are the pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So, to start us off then.
Sure, Sunny. While the first 2 days of the work week usually look similar, there's been just a slight uptick in cases this Tuesday from 499 to 512. There's been a slight revision made by the government's official tally for Monday from 500 to 499. And 477 of Tuesday's infections were domestic transmissions, with 35 of those being imported cases. 23 of these were detected at the nation's airport or seaports. Now, Korea is now around 100,000 100 cases short of 120,000 cases in total, with a death toll at 1,820. The average and daily domestic cases in the past week stands at 639. And if we take a look at our map, we do have a slight rise here in Gyeonggi-do province, almost 200 infections, but a decline in the capital Seoul. And here, Jeju-do Island, with 5 new infections, has surpassed 700 cases in total this Tuesday. Now, as for some recent trends, according to a health ministry official this Tuesday, the country's COVID-19 test positivity rate has been rising for the 6th straight week, now standing at almost 1.9%. And also, person-to-person infections, such as transmissions among family or friends, have been rising as well, now recently standing at almost 45%, and that's the highest the country is seeing this year. However, cluster infections have actually been on the decline. And now, as for our vaccination updates, we've got a total of 2.4 million people who now got at least one shot of vaccinations.
Right. Meanwhile, on the international front, so I understand the U.S. is looking to lend a helping hand with regard to vaccines.
Right, Sunny. The U.S. is willing to share up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccines once the green light is given by the FDA. So if approved, 10 million of those are expected to be shipped to countries which need those in the coming weeks. Now, millions of those vaccines could be headed to India, which is struggling against the recent surge in COVID-19 cases, reporting over 300,000 infections for a 6th consecutive day on Tuesday. Now, for now, the U.S. and the EU are getting ready to assist the country with medical oxygen, vaccine materials, as well as antiviral drugs. And so far, India has hit 17.6 million infections. And also France, Germany, and the UK, other European countries that, along with the EU, said they are going to support India. Those countries that I just mentioned are seeing less than 10,000 cases a day now. Meanwhile, apart from Indonesia, the Southeast Asian country with the second highest number of infections, the Philippines, now has just hit the 1 million mark in total cases. And the total number of infections around the world now stands at 148.4 million. Those are the updates I have for now, but I'll be back in a bit after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, authorities here have set this week as a special COVID-19 prevention period. Now, for more on this latest effort to contain the virus here, I have Kim Jae-hee in the studio with me. Welcome, Jae.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, so tell us about the toughened measures in place this particular week.
Right. Alarmed by the fast pace of transmissions and a rising number of cases with unknown epidemiological links, health authorities in the nation are trying to curb the spread of the virus with enhanced prevention rules. From April 26th to May 2nd, group meals and private gatherings are banned for civil servants. To reduce contact, teleworking as well as flexible working hours are expanded in the public sector. Also, throughout this period, on-site inspection teams will closely monitor crowded venues, and the police will keep a watchful eye on late-night entertainment facilities. Health authorities have also hinted at further limits on business operating hours or a gathering ban at restaurants and cafes if the latest outbreak fails to subside. Meanwhile, a ban on private gatherings of 5 or more people has been temporarily lifted in 12 counties across Gyeongsang-Buk-do province this week. The government is testing out this one-week grace period in less populated regions with fewer than 100,000 residents, where the spread of the virus has been kept at a manageable level.
I see. And earlier on Monday, authorities sought to dispel concerns, public concerns that is, over possible delays in the country's vaccination drive.
That's right. Acting Prime Minister Hong Nam-ki stressed on Monday that the news about potential vaccine shortages in the country is not true and assured the public that everything is going on schedule. Now, the acting prime minister pointed out that there have been no delays in the shipment of vaccines and that the government has purchased from drug makers, and expressed confidence in speeding up the country's inoculation drive, touting the new deal with Pfizer to buy additional vaccines for some 20 million people.
Korea has signed a contract to purchase 40 million additional doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And with that, we have now secured 192 million doses in total. This is enough to inoculate 99 million people, which is double our country's entire population, and triple the 36 million people required to achieve herd immunity.
Now, Hong said that the additional vaccines could help the country broaden its vaccination campaign to minors under the age of 18 and prepare for the rollout of third doses, also known as booster shots, to respond to COVID-19 variants.
That is good to know. Now, Jay, do remind us about where we stand with regard to our vaccination campaign.
Now, currently, around 4.6 million, 6% of the population have received their first doses of the vaccine so far. Now, starting Monday, some 177,000 essential workers, including police and firefighters and Coast Guard service members, and roughly 294,000 doctors, nurses, and pharmacists started getting their shots. And from Wednesday, tomorrow that is, inoculations will begin for some 126,000 military service members aged 30 and over. Now, their vaccinations were previously scheduled for June, but has been fast-tracked by about 2 months. Now, starting in May, the government plans to broaden its vaccination campaign to all members of the general public. From late May, elderly citizens between the ages 70 to 74 are expected to receive their first jabs as well.
Right, and this puts Korea family on track to secure herd immunity by November then.
That's right. Now, Korea is scaling up its rollout to reach capacity of 1.5 million daily vaccinations by the end of May. The government is looking to hand out first doses to 3 million people by the end of April, and to 12 million people in the first half of the year, and 36 million people, which is 70% of Korea's population, by the end of September, to reach herd immunity ahead of its schedule before its stated goal of November. Now, in the meantime, to ramp up testing, self-administered COVID-19 test kits, which can provide results in about 15 minutes, will be available for purchase at pharmacies and online next week. However, the government is recommending their use only as supplementary tools due to their low accuracy compared to the standard PCR test.
Right, just as medical experts have been saying. All right, Che, thank you very much for that coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Right, it's time now for the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea for this Tuesday. Now, regardless of the drop in recent daily tallies as compared to last week, authorities are calling for strict adherence to prevention measures as infection numbers, that is expected to rebound in the days ahead in reflection of the surge in public movement amid the warm weather. And while we wait for the briefing to start, here are a few words related to possible physical discomforts after COVID-19 vaccination. First, in general, medical experts say it is completely normal to feel uncomfortable up to 48 hours post-inoculation. Now, this is reportedly an indication that the vaccine is working. Right, I understand the briefing is about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
I am the Commissioner of KDCA, and let us now begin our regular briefing for April 27th. First of all, here are some updates on our COVID-19 vaccination. This week, at regional vaccination centers, we have 93 more centers being opened this week, and we have a total of 257 to be up and running. And to this end, as for the public and as for those seniors aged over the age of 75 who are awaiting to be inoculated, please comply with their schedule and visit a nearby vaccination center as we have increased their accessibility. And yesterday alone, we have 141,937 more people receiving their first dose, that is, and we have 2,409,975 of the total people who have administered their first shot. And this is more than the daily average that we saw a week ago. And also we have in schedule tomorrow that we will have additional Pfizer vaccines to arrive in Korea. And to this end, out of the 7 million to arrive in South Korea by the first half of this year, we have 2 million that have already arrived, and another 5 million will also arrive as scheduled. And here are some COVID-19 factors abroad. And abroad and globally, we are seeing a 9th straight week increase of the emergence of the COVID-19 virus. And this is hitting a new record of the cases since the first day of the first daily cases. And yesterday, we also have more than 600,000 people who were infected on a daily basis globally. And we are also seeing a rapid increase of the virus and infections in Southeast Asia. And in India, we are also seeing very devastating numbers of more than 300,000 daily cases. And in Germany and Canada, they are also expanding their inoculation rollout. However, they are struggling with enhanced numbers of infections, and they are also intensifying their quarantine measures. And in Israel and UK, where they have high rate of vaccination, they are also advising people to wear face masks at indoor spaces and also enhancing their quarantine measures. And looking at these cases, South Korea is also rolling out our vaccines swiftly. However, we need to also continue to ask you to comply with strict quarantine measures like wearing a face mask and also keeping social distancing measures. And here are our updates on new variants. And as for the COVID-19 test samples, we have looked at 86 new variants. And since October, we have confirmed 535 new variants here in South Korea. And we are also categorizing them. And as for the UK variants, we have 464 variants, 4 cases. And also South African variant, we have 10 more variants. And 61 in total have been confirmed. And also out of the 86 new variants, we have been looking at these cases, and 34 were imported cases, and 52 were domestic transmissions. And also we are looking at 6 new cluster infections found here in Korea, and also 41 people have been identified with new variant, while the rest of 11 were individual infections. And to this end, as for the UK new variants, we are analyzing the period of transmission and infection, and we have modified our results. And by new variant types, we also aimed to see which is the perfect and the optimal time for the self-quarantine. And as for the UK variant, which accounts for the majority found here in South Korea, we have been looking at the PCR amplification tests. And as for the UK new variant, we have seen that as for these new new variants, there has been no difference in the period of infection compared to other strains of the virus. And to this end, we have been evaluating the analysis, and we also have seen that the UK variants will also be faced with the same quarantine measures that are applied to other COVID-19 cases. And going forward, we will also conduct analysis, a similar analysis like PCR testings and also amplification testings for the South African and Brazilian variants to provide a necessary and optimal timeline for self-quarantine and discharge. And to this end, the quarantine authorities are also intensifying our monitoring and review of the new variants found here in South Korea. And also, as for the people who are on self-quarantine following arrival from overseas, we are also asking you to comply with quarantine measures, especially if you live together with your family members. And looking at the cases found in UK and other countries have also seen the importance and cruciality of conducting the quarantine measures together with the vaccination rollout. And to this end, we ask you to comply with the basic quarantine rules, like the gathering ban on private gatherings of more than 5 people, and also face mask wearing and social distancing measures, and also refrain from having non-essential outings or group meetings. And if you have any clinical symptoms of COVID-19, please visit a screening clinic as soon as possible to get tested. Moreover, if you seem that a multi-use facility cannot have a proper ventilation, please wear your face mask, and please also safeguard the health of others as well. Thank you very much.
Right, that was Chung Young with Tuesday's afternoon briefing. So what did she have to say?
She had some updates on the variant cases here in the country. 86 new variant cases were detected, and that raises the total here in the nation to 535. And 34 of those 86 new cases were imported cases, and the other 52 were domestic infections. Out of those, 41 were linked to cluster infections, and 11 were individual cases. She also said that there has been an analysis regarding for how long the variants can spread to other people. So in the case of the UK variant, the incubation period seems to be similar to the original strain that we know of, but there will be more analysis made regarding the South African and the Brazilian variant.
I see. All right, so thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
Right, up next, a group of volunteers has been working to show support and gratitude to medical workers dedicated to the fight against COVID-19. To take a look.
For more than a year now, medical workers across Korea have been risking life and limb to fight the COVID-19 outbreak. The entire nation is cheering on their efforts, with gestures of kindness and support streaming in from all corners of the country. Since last March, this woman who resides in the city of Suwon, just south of Seoul, has been preparing lunchboxes and tasty treats to be delivered to medical workers every Friday. Her efforts have earned the recognition of the government, being named to a list of community heroes by the Ministry of the Interior and Safety. What started off as a small individual effort has now grown into a large undertaking involving many other volunteers.
주민센터 거기에서 이렇게 쿠키 만드는 그 교실을 한다고 해서 모집한다고 해서 거기에 그래서 여기 한번 가보자 해서 참여하게 됐어요. 이분들이 도시락을 밥을 저녁을 제대로 못 드신다고 그러더라고요. 그러면은 우리가 쿠키 하면서 도시락도 같이 더 하나씩 정성껏 해가지고 갖다 드리면 어떨까 그런 취지에서 지금까지 의료진들 도시락 싸고 있어요.
장 보는 것부터 배달까지 쿠키는 거의 전담이에요. 그래서 활동을 너무 많이 하셔서 정말 상을 타야 될 사람이 탄 거고 그래 또 그런 분하고 같이 봉사할 수 있는 저희도 되게 보람되고 그래요.
일도 잘하고 싹싹하고 언니들한테 잘하고 동네 어르신들한테도 잘하고 봉사단에 없어서는 안 될 그런 형이에요.
The group is now engaging in even more acts of charity, like delivering birthday meals for elderly folks living alone. They say none of this would have been possible without the support of their neighbors in the community.
행궁동 동사무소 거기 저 관에서는 저희 오븐을 지원해 주시고요. 그다음에 여기 동네 빵집에서는 우리 쿠키 배울 수 있는 레시피 같은 거 가르쳐 주시고요. 도와주시는 분 없었으면 저희도 이렇게 의료진 도시락을 지금까지 못하죠.
The volunteers have been busy packing lunchboxes since the morning, and it isn't until 4 in the afternoon that their work is done. These freshly packed meals are now ready to be delivered to medical workers who are resting after another hard day of work.
그냥 짠하다고 해야 될까요? 집에 못 가는 거 객진하면 고생한다잖아요. 그 종식 될 때까지 건강하게, 무조건 건강이 최고니까 그때까지 저희 음식, 건강한 음식 먹고 건강해서 가셨으면 좋겠어요.
These meals mean much more than simply food in their stomachs for medical workers on the receiving end.
저희가 간호사가 지금 현재 교대 근무이다 보니까 숙소 생활을 하면서 제때 끼니를 시간 맞춰서 먹기가 상당히 애로사항이 많습니다. 집에서 부모님들이 해주시는 밥처럼 먹을 수 있게 해주셔서 상당히 감사하게 생각하고 있고요. 정말 우리 의료진들을 이렇게 열심히 응원하는 분들이 많이 계시구나 생각하면서요. 참으로 많은 도움이 되고 정말 감사하고 저희가 더 열심히 보답해드려야겠다 생각하고 있습니다.
The COVID-19 pandemic has been a difficult ordeal for all of us, but small gestures of kindness among neighbors and strangers alike may give us the courage to overcome this crisis together.
Benefits of the vaccine continue to outweigh these risks, and we now have detailed information in the labeling that alerts to these risks.
영국의 경우에는 접종 대상자의 절반이 아스트라제네카 백신을 접종하였습니다. 전문가 유럽 의약품청도 극히 드문 부작용으로 접종 편익이 훨씬 크다는 의견을 제시하고 있습니다.
Today, we take another in-depth look at the potential link between COVID-19 vaccines and reports of rare blood clots. For this, I have Professor Chung Gi-seok from Hallym University. Welcome back, Professor Chung.
Thank you for having me.
And joining our session virtually is Professor Bob Graham at the Victor Chang Cardiac Research Institute. Pleasure to have you with us, Professor Graham, over in Australia.
Thank you. Very kind of you to have us on.
Right, Professor Chung, the general consensus with regard to AstraZeneca and Janssen vaccines, amid reports of rare blood clots, is that the potential or the tangible benefits, that is, outweigh the rare and potential risks. How do you respond?
Yes, still it is definitive that the benefit of vaccination is better than the risk of getting thrombosis. When you are talking about blood clotting in vaccine-related condition, it is not the meaning of generalized blood clotting in our body. Thrombosis in our body is not a rare disease. It's scattered here and there, and prone persons are obese, elderly, and who are sedentary, and etc. But what we are talking about, blood clotting in especially the vaccine-related blood clotting, is called VITT, vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia. It's quite complicated, but that means vaccine-induced immunological basis of thrombosis and thrombocytopenia. It's a very peculiar one. And there should be several conditions to diagnose that. First of all, that should be related with a vaccine inoculation. After vaccine inoculation, 4 days to 28 days are risky period. And you have evidence of a clotting in your body, either in brain, legs, or in abdomen, and etc. and you should have a platelet count less than 150,000. So that's very complicated and a very rare disease. The incidence is reported to be 1 in million or 1 in 100,000 according to age group. So it is a very rare disease, and you should not be much afraid of getting that kind of rare blood clotting disorder after vaccine inoculation.
I see. Professor Graham, let's get some basic information about blood clots before we proceed any further. What causes them and what are some of their symptoms?
Yeah, sure. So look, clotting is a very important process. It's what stops us from bleeding when, for example, we cut our finger. And as soon as there's an injury of a blood vessel, for example, this stimulates platelets and also activates a whole series of proteins. And together these form a clot, which stops blood from continuing to leak out of the cut blood vessel. So platelets are fragments of cells in our bloodstream, and when they're activated, they clump together and they block the hole in the blood vessel. So clotting is a very important process, but it can go awry, and that's what happens commonly, for example, in deep venous thrombosis, which mainly affects the veins of the legs. And there you can see an increased tendency to get clots, particularly much more common, for example, in women who are on the pill, women who are pregnant. But it also can be associated with older age, cancer, obesity, infection, or inflammatory conditions. So there's a whole lot of, or even genetic conditions that predispose to clotting. So what's unusual, as the professor mentioned about this clot, is it doesn't generally affect mainly the legs, but it mainly affects the brain, or at least the veins that drain the brain, and also can affect the veins within the abdomen. But the ones in the brain are the ones that are very serious. So they're the real worry.
I see. And I can only imagine that the blood clots, that is, in the brain would be fatal, Professor Graham. Would you agree?
Well, look, there's certainly the mortality is high. It's about 20 to 50% if you get one of these serious forms of clotting. The less serious forms are still bad. They generally don't always lead straight away to death. They start off with a headache or seizures, or you may have a loss of vision, or you might get ringing in the ears. And if they involve the eyes, your eyes might bulge out, which is also a very serious condition. But they can be treated if you get them early. The treatment is fairly specific. We use thrombin inhibitors rather than warfarin, which can actually make it worse. And they generally do respond if you get them early on. But if they get a bit past that early stage, they certainly have a very, very high mortality.
I see. Professor Chong, the vaccines that have been linked to these rare cases of blood clots are AstraZeneca and Janssen, which share a similar technology with regard to development. Do you suppose this technology perhaps is to blame for the possible post-inoculation adverse reactions?
Yeah, I suppose so. In the first place, in the clinical trial until the phase 3 trial, both Janssen and AstraZeneca couldn't find any this kind of rare diseases. But this was found and observed after marketing, so-called post-marketing surveillance. So the reason why this kind of vaccine, so-called adenovirus vector vaccine, causes thrombosis is partly studied by some studies. And in that study, they say that adenovirus and also the DNA or RNA can make a blood clot in your blood vessel. So that's one of the reasons why we are worrying about adenovirus vector vaccine. But the exact mechanism is not well known. Until so far, the mechanism is reported as having a platelet factor 4 antibody formation. When you have a vaccine in your body, then your body reacts as making an antibody. During that process, your body makes platelet factor 4 antibody. That leads to platelet activation, and that leads to a platelet depletion in the blood. So you can see both clotting and bleeding tendency in the body. Still, we are worrying about the adenovirus vector vaccine causing rare blood clotting diseases. So maybe it could be applied to another kind of adenoviral vector vaccine, like Sputnik V from Russia or CanSino from China. So we'll look and see what happens with those kind of vaccine.
Right, I see. Professor Graham, I believe there have been 6 cases of blood clots in Australia linked to AstraZeneca, including 1 loss of life. Could you tell us a bit about this?
Yes, that's certainly the case. The one woman who died was 48, but she's complicated by the fact that she had lots of what we call comorbidity. She had other problems. She had quite severe diabetes. So the direct link with the vaccine is not entirely certain, although it's likely that she probably did die of a blood clot. Now, because of that, the government has now changed the way that we give out the vaccine, and we're reserving the AstraZeneca vaccine for people who are over 50 because their incidence of clotting is much less than those who are under 50. And so we're reserving the AstraZeneca for those over 50, and for those under 50, we're using the Pfizer vaccine. As the professor mentioned, it's also been seen with other vaccines, such as the Janssen vaccine, but we don't have the Janssen vaccine here in Australia. I don't know if you have it in Korea.
Yes, not yet, Professor. Professor Chung, as Professor Graham has mentioned, Australia is reserving the AstraZeneca vaccine for those above 50. Korea is reserving it for those above 30. What role does age play in raising the risk of rare blood clots?
This is just from observational decision, because in European countries, they saw quite many aged 40s and 50s have had this kind of a rare clotting disorder. And from a Janssen vaccine, the CDC and FDA approved the reuse, but they observed again from 18 to 48 years old, particularly in women, there was a tendency to have a higher blood clotting problem. So in that sense, Korea restricts only under 30s, but I think I recommend Korean government to think about think over and over, because women in their 30s and 40s are prone to proved to be prone to get a rare kind of a VITT. So if any happens in those ages, when you keep injecting AstraZeneca vaccine in Korea, then nobody will believe the Korean government, their policy and their decision. So I would recommend the decision should be wholly based on a scientific decision, not decided by a supply and demand issue and other issues.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Graham, a recent study by the University of Oxford claims the risk of rare blood clots is greater in COVID-19 patients than in vaccinated people. What are your thoughts on this?
That's certainly the case. I mean, we've only seen, for example, 5 cases per million approximately of blood clots, so these sort of blood clots in people who have got the vaccines. But with COVID, you see up to 39 people per million getting blood clots. And the blood clots they get are even at least as bad, if not worse, because one gets a sort of disseminated or widespread clotting, part of which is due to the fact that you have inflammation going on that affects also the lining blood vessel cells, what they call the endothelial cells. We get an endotheliolitis, and therefore you can get widespread clotting, which is a real major problem. So it's a very severe, associated with very severe COVID if one gets that problem, but it's much more common, or significantly more common than one gets with the vaccine.
What then, Professor Graham, would be more dangerous? Blood clots caused by COVID-19 or those by vaccines?
Oh, I think both of them are not good to get, but I think that the generalized effects of COVID would probably make it worse. We know fairly well how to treat the blood clots associated with the vaccine if they're anything like what we see with heparin. This is a blood thinner which can also cause this sort of venous thrombosis in the brain. And we know how to treat those, and the same sort of treatment is being used for the vaccine-induced clots. So I think that we know how to treat them well, but with the COVID, severe COVID, That's more problematic. We are trying various ways of anticoagulating those patients, but because it's so widespread, it's very difficult often to treat that, and many patients succumb because of that.
I see. Professor Chung, are there any pre-existing health conditions that could raise one's risk of rare blood clots post-inoculation?
Not that I know of, because I cannot imagine any kind of predisposing underlying disease which causes this kind of BITT, rare disease, because it is unknown, quite unknown so far, and the mechanism is not unknown, even though I mentioned about the platelet factor 4 antibodies. So there should not be any kind of underlying disease which can predispose to this kind of disease. But as we have observed, certain age groups from 18 to 48, and in women, there was much occurrence of this kind of disease compared to the other group. So maybe sometime later, certain kind of underlying disease could be proved to be a predisposing factor, risk factor. But so far, anyone who have underlying disease will not be afraid of getting a VITT after vaccination.
I see. Then, Professor Graham, what are some of the early warning signs of possible blood clots?
Yeah, could I just maybe comment on what the professor just said there? Certainly we need more studies to try and understand what happens with the vaccines that have been implicated to cause clotting. For example, do platelets fall commonly or uncommonly in people? I suspect it's uncommon because this clotting's uncommon. Do the people who get these clots, do they all have anti-platelet factor 4? I think so far most of them do, but we need more cases and we need to study this more before we understand it. Presumably, if you've had heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, you may be at more risk, and that would be a group of people that I would be a little reluctant to use the AstraZeneca or Janssen vaccines in, but that's a very, very small group of people. So sorry, can I just go back to the question that you were asking? Could you just repeat that again?
Right, Professor Graham, I was actually asking what are some of the early warning signs of potential blood clots after your inoculation?
Yes, well, look, it's not uncommon after inoculation to feel a little unwell and you get some muscle aches and pains, and a lot of people get headaches. So it's going to be difficult to distinguish the headaches you get from just an ordinary inoculation from the sort of headaches, although I suspect it'd be much more severe if you're starting to get a clot within the veins in your brain. And certainly if you get a headache that persists or is very severe, I think that would be the earliest warning sign. And hopefully you wouldn't have proceeded yet to the stage of getting a seizure or having some loss of function of your arm or leg or your eyes. So I think the earliest warning sign would be a severe headache. And if you get that and it's persistent, you should probably seek medical care pretty quickly.
Right. And given what's been shared so far, Professor Chung, what essentially are your words to the public in light of efforts to fight the pandemic via COVID-19 vaccination?
Yeah, the best vaccine is what you have in front of you in your turn. So when your turn comes, you need to get any kind of vaccine the government is providing. But I would like to recommend the government to provide the safest vaccine as possible. If any suspicion on specific age group, like Australia did, they restricted under 50. So if any suspicion is continued in the society, there will be more people who are not agreeing to get any kind of vaccination apart from virus vector vaccination. So the EMA, FDA, and WHO all are saying in common words that the benefit outweighs the risk. So I would recommend as many people as possible in Korea to get the vaccination as soon as possible so we can live without masks and we can live with having our close friends very closely and frequently.
Right. And Professor Graham, what is your stance on COVID-19 vaccination?
Look, I agree entirely with Professor Chung. I do think it depends a little bit on how much COVID you have. In Australia at the moment, we're in a fortunate situation where we have very, very little COVID around. We haven't had any around for months, except for isolated cases that are coming in by aeroplane. So we have the luxury of being able to wait and defer vaccination, although I don't think that's a wise policy for too long. If there isn't enough, say, Pfizer vaccine for the young, we can wait until some comes in. But if you're in a country that has a lot of COVID going on, like India, you've got no choice. You've got to take what you've got and take it quickly, because that's the only way we're going to get on top of this pandemic.
Professor Graham, what would be one way of addressing perhaps vaccine hesitancy in areas where the outbreak is quite severe?
Look, I think that the potential harm from getting COVID, let alone dying, I mean, there's not only dying, there's all the other problems you get associated with COVID, plus there's a long-term COVID, all the problems you get after you've had it, far, far outweigh any concerns about the vaccine. I mean, by and large, the complications of the vaccine are very, very unusual. And I think these vaccines are, by and large, extremely safe. For example, our incidence of clotting is far, far less than what women who are taking the oral contraceptive pill have the risk of clotting, which is very much higher. So in a situation where you've got a pandemic, I think it makes a lot of sense to be taking the vaccine as early as possible.
Right. Professor Zhang, keeping in mind what Professor Graham has just said, what would be one credible way of addressing public concerns over vaccine safety here in Korea amid reports of blood clots?
Yes, Professor Graham said oral contraceptives are causing more blood clot problem compared to vaccine these days. I would again like to recommend the government to build a trust on their vaccine policy. So people could agree that any kind of vaccine that government is providing is safe. Apart from effectiveness, all kinds of vaccines are proved to be effective so far, but the safety concern is for each individual's concern. So government can never persuade any individuals to get vaccine. It's not a compulsory one. So in order to for anyone to decide in a proper way, the best way is to build trust. So you can trust the government, then you can trust the safety of the vaccine.
Professor Graham, how do you respond to concerns that the growing presence of variants may actually challenge our ultimate effort to try to fight the pandemic?
Well, that's a real concern, although so far, even with the South African variants and the variants, the UK variant, we still seem to be getting protection by the current vaccines. They may not be quite as effective as with the older variants that we have initially, but they still seem to be doing a good job. But it is a concern. The more the pandemic goes on, and the more we have widespread infections going on, the more likely we are to get variants. And then, of course, it depends on whether the variants are going to be more transmissible and more infectious or less. Most of them so far that we worry about, of course, are more transmissible and more infectious. So it is a concern, but, with the flu, for example, they change every year. So we have to change the vaccine every year, and maybe we'll have to do the same thing for COVID.
Right. Professor Zhang, I'd like to direct your attention back here in the country then. Our social distancing measures are poised to end this coming Sunday. Given our current situation, COVID-19 situation that is, what do you propose for our future social distancing measures? Should we raise them, lower them? What are your thoughts as the former head of the KDCD?
It's a very difficult question to answer because first of all, the Koreans are losing alertness on COVID-19 because we are having every day 500 new cases at least these days. But today, yesterday and today we saw 500 cases a day, but people are now thinking about, it's not very bad. We are not in the fourth wave of a pandemic. Still, But we are already we begun the fourth wave, and we are heading for a peak. When it will come, I don't know. But one day we'll meet, because this kind of current kind of social distancing is not sufficient for suppressing current patient occurring. So I like to recommend the raising the social distancing level, but people wouldn't follow that. Maybe there will be a strong resistance to follow that kind of restriction. So then I'd rather recommend imposing a penalty who are violating the quarantine rule, or who are violating the facilities that is violating the current rule. That could, if you impose a sanction stronger than before, then without having social distancing level up, you can still control the occurrence of COVID-19 cases in this country.
Right, hopefully. All right, Professor Chung, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Graham over in Australia, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Sure, thank you.
Right, the wisdom at the moment with regard to COVID-19 inoculation is that vaccines are more beneficial than painful. Thank you for watching.